In the depths of a dark forest, a terrifying figure emerged, an ominous girl with a monstrous appearance, her fangs bared, sending waves of dread through the men who witnessed her. At the village's edge, the village chief and a young boy stood solemnly before a bloodied sign at the forest entrance. The chief, with a somber expression, speculated that the vampire had placed the sign following the raid the previous night. He then began recounting a tale from a century ago when a deadly epidemic had ravaged their village. Amid the chaos, a doctor missing an arm and a leg arrived, offering his services and tending to the sick. With him was his daughter, a girl who feared the sun. In gratitude for his help, the doctor requested a piece of land deep within the forest. It would later be revealed that the daughter was a vampire. However, the boy had heard a different version of the story. In his version, the doctor and his daughter were siblings who had wandered into the village. The doctor lived out his final days there, and after his death, his vampire sister remained. Despite the differing accounts, the village chief remained indifferent. What mattered, he said, was that 3 villagers had been attacked while hunting. Fearing for their safety, the villagers sought help from the Hunters Association. However, the chief was disappointed when a young man without a weapon arrived to help. The young man explained calmly that he was an investigator and that protocol required an investigation before any action could be taken. Just then, Marco stormed into the room, his frustration palpable. He was furious at the slow response, especially since everyone had already seen the vampire in the woods, the very same vampire who had attacked his family, leaving him orphaned. He recounted how he had awoken one day to find his parents dead, with only his sister Alina surviving the attack, though she was gravely ill. The group then visited Marco's home to check on Alina. After some time, Alina regained consciousness, and the investigator, introducing himself as Ain, gently inquired about what she had witnessed in the forest. As she began to recall the encounter with the vampire, she was overcome with grief, causing her to lose consciousness again. The trauma of the attack had broken her spirit, and she would only wake sporadically, haunted by the memories. To everyone's surprise, Ain declared that the next step in his investigation was to confront the vampire personally. He ventured into the dark forest, conversing with his serpent companion about the vampire who had remained seemingly harmless for a century. Unbeknownst to Ain, Marco, driven by a thirst for revenge, also ventured into the woods, determined to confront the vampire himself. As Marco delved deeper into the forest, he encountered their lost puppy, Nero, whom he had presumed dead. Nero barked excitedly, urging Marco to follow him further into the woods. Meanwhile, Ain arrived at an old, dilapidated house, where he noticed a warning sign cautioning against entering, promising dire consequences for those who ignored it. He found the warning rather polite, brushing it off as he forced his way inside. Inside, Ain encountered a female vampire with long black hair. Her eyes glowed with fury at his intrusion. With a smile, Ain calmly stated that he needed to speak with her. The vampire, dismissing him, insisted there was nothing to discuss. She attempted to intimidate him, using her hair as a weapon, but Ain easily evaded her attack, catching her off guard. With a swift motion, Ain sliced through the vampire's hair, using the letter opener, forcing her back against the wall. Her attempts at regeneration were futile as his rapid strikes left her cornered with no escape. Closing the distance between them, Ain pointed the weapon at her throat, asking coldly if she had any last words before he ended her life. Trembling in fear, the vampire locked eyes with him, her terror palpable. Tears began to well up in her eyes as memories of her little brother flooded her mind, memories of when he was still full of life. Her voice cracked as she confessed that she didn't want to die yet. Ain, sensing her desperation, asked if she was truly willing to fight for her survival, reminding her that she had no family left and that the villagers were hunting her. Breaking down, the vampire wailed, her voice filled with anguish. She explained that she didn't want her brother to be forgotten. He had sacrificed everything for her, never marrying, never building a life of his own. When she became a vampire, he abandoned all his dreams to protect her, spending his days trying to find a way to make her human again. Wherever they went, no matter how much they helped others, once people discovered she was a vampire, they were hunted. Yet through it all, her brother never once stopped smiling beside her. But now he was gone. If she died, he would be forgotten, and his memory would vanish forever. Ain listened, his expression calm, and then gently spoke. He told her that everyone would eventually disappear, that memories fade when people die. It was a sad truth, but it was the way of the world. With that, Ain slowly lowered his weapon and bowed, apologizing for his intrusion and the threat he had made. The vampire, overcome with emotion, collapsed to the ground in a mix of relief and exhaustion. Ain, still composed, explained that he had never truly believed she meant harm, especially with the warning sign she had placed at the entrance to the forest. Just then, Marco burst into the room, brandishing an axe, Nero by his side. His face was twisted in rage as he demanded Ain execute the vampire, believing she was responsible for the deaths of his family. Ain stepped in front of Marco, asserting that the vampire was innocent, including in the attack on his sister. Confused, Marco insisted that his sister was still alive. Before he could say more, the dog, Nero, transformed right before his eyes into his sister, Alina. Marco stood frozen in shock, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. Alina, now in her true form, smirked, complimenting Ain on his investigative skills before turning to the vampire girl and apologizing for the inconvenience caused. Ain, realizing the true danger, revealed to Marco that the figure before him was not his sister but a parasite vampire. These vampires, he explained, killed their victims and took over their bodies to impersonate them, blending in and fooling everyone. They often posed as harmless creatures before striking, luring their prey. Marco's eyes widened in horror as he finally understood the monster had been Nero all along. Alina mocked Marco, shifting her head into Nero's form before reverting back to Alina, laughing cruelly at his devastated expression. With twisted glee, she boasted about how easy it had been to manipulate the village, fooling its naive inhabitants. She even taunted the vampire girl, claiming she should be thankful Alina's actions had kept the hunters at bay, allowing her to live in peace. But the vampire girl screamed in protest, rejecting the idea of hurting humans like Alina had. Her refusal to cooperate only fueled Alina's rage. The vampire's smile faded, and with a swift motion, she lunged at the girl. Marco tried to intervene, desperate to protect what he still believed was his sister. In the ensuing struggle, Ain was injured as he attempted to prevent Marco from being harmed. With a sly grin, Alina thanked Marco for his help, further manipulating him into believing they were still family. In an unexpected turn, Ain proposed a compromise. He suggested that Alina stop hunting people and feed off Marco's blood instead. That way, no one else would be harmed, and Ain wouldn't report her to the association, ensuring more hunters wouldn't come after her. Alina laughed scornfully, accusing Ain of trying to save his own life. She advanced toward him, taunting him to come up with a better idea if he truly wanted to survive. Marco found himself caught in a painful conflict, torn between his lingering attachment to the person his sister once was and the harsh reality unfolding before him. He pleaded with Alina, urging her to stop causing harm to Ain. However, Alina, bristling with fury at Marco's audacity to challenge her, unleashed her anger, mockingly suggesting that if he cared so much about protecting others, he might as well die himself. As she raised her hand to strike, a young vampire intervened, pulling Marco out of harm's way just in time. The vampire girl, desperate to open Marco's eyes, tried to reason with him. She explained that the sister he remembered no longer existed, her humanity lost forever. What stood before him now was merely a monstrous shell, incapable of returning to the life they once shared. But Alina, unfazed by the accusations, scoffed at Marco, belittling his attempts to restrain her. She revealed that she had only pretended to act as his sister to maintain her cover. Now that the truth was out, she had no reason to keep up the charade. As tensions mounted, Ain, weakened but resolute, prepared himself to protect both Marco and the vampire girl from Alina's wrath. He addressed Alina one last time, reminding her of her former humanity and offering her a chance to coexist peacefully among humans. Alina, however, dismissed his words with disdain, making it clear that she had no intention of abandoning her predatory ways. Realizing that words had failed, Ain resolved to act. Drawing upon his metal manipulation abilities, he broke free from Alina's grasp, his weapon shifting back into the form of a simple pen. With a faint, knowing smile, he remarked on a technique his vampire mentor had taught him. As the atmosphere grew heavier, black serpents began emerging from his coat, their sinister presence revealing that Ain was far more than he appeared. Alina's confidence wavered as she grasped the gravity of the situation. The serpents, exuding an almost playful malice, teased each other while eagerly eyeing their prey. Ain, exuding calm amid the chaos, reprimanded them for their impatience, granting them permission to deal with Alina. The serpents coalesced into a colossal form, overwhelming Alina, who stood frozen in fear. As she tried to make sense of the situation, she questioned why a half-vampire would ally with humans. Ain remained silent, letting the serpents mock her for rejecting the chance she had been given. In moments, the serpents consumed her completely, leaving behind only her ashes. As the dust settled, Ain's thoughts drifted back to the teachings of his mentor, who had often warned him against showing mercy to vampires. His master had insisted that vampires, having abandoned their humanity, could not be treated as equals to the living. Though Ain had argued against such absolutes, his master's words echoed in his mind now. Looking down at the ashes, he muttered a quiet acknowledgement that the negotiation had failed. Turning to Marco and the vampire girl, Ain saw the shock and grief etched on their faces. The girl, still shaken by what she had witnessed, hesitantly asked Ain about his true nature. He revealed that he was a half-vampire born to a vampire father. Relieved, she introduced herself as Yura, prompting a small smile from Ain as he thanked her for her assistance. Marco, overcome with guilt and sorrow, blamed himself for his family's demise, questioning why he alone had survived. Ain, speaking with quiet reassurance, told Marco that his survival held purpose, that by living, he could honor his family's memory and ensure their existence was not forgotten. Marco's grief gave way to uncontrollable sobbing, and Yura, reminded of her own losses, joined him in tears. After regaining some composure, Marco apologized to Ain for doubting him and for the trouble he had caused. He also questioned why Ain had delayed confronting Alina directly if he had already known her true nature. Ain explained that he wanted Marco to hear the truth from Alina herself, ensuring there would be no lingering doubts or misplaced resentment toward the hunters. In the end, his gamble had paid off, and Yura's innocence was proven. Though Marco found himself irritated at being used as bait, Ain responded with a self-aware smile, admitting to the truth of the accusation. With his mission in the village complete, Ain began his departure, boarding a carriage as Marco and Yura watched him as they leave. One of the serpents remarks on Ain's solemn expression, speculating that he might be concerned about Yura. The serpent suggests bringing her along, but Ain, with a heavy heart, replies that he has done his part in clarifying the misunderstanding. He hopes the villagers will come to accept her. Meanwhile, Yura visits her brother's grave, reflecting on his last words to her. He had urged her to find someone who would stand by her, and when that day came, to let go of the past and live without guilt, knowing that he had been happy beside her. With these thoughts in mind, Yura makes a resolution. Just as Ain's carriage is about to depart the village, she stops it and boldly asks Ain to take her along. Ain is momentarily caught off guard. Calmly, he asks her about her home, to which she responds that it is nothing more than a collection of memories. Resolute, she states that if she holds on to the past and fails to move forward, her brother's life will have been meaningless. Moved by her determination, Ain agrees to take her on his journey. As they ride together in the carriage, Yura asks Ain why he decided to help her. He explains that he was raised by vampires, and over time, he found it impossible to live a normal life among humans. Seeing her situation, he wanted to save her from the same fate. He considers becoming a vampire a curse, and his goal is to help both humans and vampires, ideally without resorting to violence. Yura, touched by his calm and steadfast resolve, recalls her brother's advice to avoid fighting whenever possible. She then decides to support Ain on his journey, to which Ain expresses his gratitude. A devastating war had once ravaged humanity, causing the vampire population to swell and pushing humans to the edge of extinction. The turning point came with the intervention of a powerful northern nation known as Yggdrasil. This nation, which had stayed neutral during the war, fought valiantly against the vampires and ultimately saved humanity. On their journey, Ain tells Yura that the world she knew with her brother still carries the scars of that war, but the present era is the most peaceful it has ever been. However, he warns that peace is fragile and they must remain vigilant. When they arrive at Ain's home, Yura is amazed by its size and its secluded location far from the city. Ain explains that his family is large and living closer to the city might cause unnecessary complications. As they enter the mansion, they are greeted by a man named Kuro, who remarks on Ain bringing home yet another vampire. Kuro gives Ain a brief update on the events that transpired in his absence, but their conversation is interrupted by an odd noise approaching. Kuro sighs and steps aside, advising Yura to do the same. Suddenly, a pack of wolves rushes toward Ain, surrounding him and happily licking him all over. After the enthusiastic greeting, Ain is left soaking wet, prompting Kuro to scold him for not controlling the wolves. Ain defends the wolves, saying they mean no harm, but Kuro points out that their behavior can be a bit much, especially when deliveries arrive. As Ain leads the wolves away to feed them, he asks Kuro to show Yura around the house. Once alone, Kuro apologizes to Yura for the chaotic scene, noticing her stunned expression. Seeing her confusion, he explains that the wolves are actually vampires Ain has rescued during his travels. He further reveals that Ain feeds on them with his blood, which shocks Yura, making her realize the potential danger to Ain's life. Kuro acknowledges the risk but reassures her that Ain is not fully human, he is half vampire. Yura admits that she is still processing this new information and Kuro agrees, noting that Ain is certainly an exception. As they sit in the living room, Kuro begins to explain the true nature of vampire nourishment, revealing that many vampires themselves are unaware of this reality. He asks Yura if she has ever wondered why vampires need blood from living humans and why they can't consume blood that has already been separated from the body. Yura remembers that she could only drink blood directly from her brother, unable to consume it once it had left his body. Kuro explains that vampires don't need blood itself but the human vitality it carries. He details how vampires absorb this vitality as a source of energy, enhancing their powers since they cannot generate such energy on their own. While humans naturally produce and circulate this energy via their blood, vampires lack the ability to control or create this flow. Though physically stronger than humans, vampires would perish without this vital energy. Noticing Yura's pale complexion, Kuro inquires about her well-being, commenting that she seems nearly drained. Yura looks at him, puzzled, as Kuro acknowledges her impressive ability to endure hunger. At that moment, Ain enters the room, teasing Kuro for becoming more observant in his old age. Kuro, in turn, reminds Ain that he's 5 times older, which surprises Yura. Concerned for Ain's health after giving so much blood, Yura asks if he's okay. Ain reassures her that he only allowed the vampires to lick his blood, which only confuses her further. Noticing her confusion, Kuro questions whether Yura is truly a vampire, pointing out that her senses seem dull. Ain steps in, explaining that Yura might be in a state known as living off the haze. Summoning his familiar Morris, Ain compares Yura's condition to that of a gecko, which absorbs body heat to recharge rather than consume food directly. Yura, in essence, is a hermit vampire in an extreme energy-saving mode. Ain continues, explaining that under certain circumstances, vampires can achieve a state nearly identical to that of humans if multiple factors align: profound grief strong enough to suppress hunger, a cherished promise to someone important, prolonged isolation, and personal beliefs or constitutions. When these elements come together, a vampire can stabilize both mind and body in an energy state close to zero. Ain adds that there's an abundance of unrefined mana in nature, even in the air they breathe. Hermit vampires like Yura can absorb this unrefined mana, which not only alleviates their hunger but also diminishes their instincts to hunt for prey. He suspects that Yura must have experienced intense hunger when near humans. Yura admits she did, often feeding on her brother to quell the hunger. However, since his death, she no longer feels that hunger, even around humans, nor does she desire to feed. Kuro remarks that such a state must be convenient. Suddenly, both Kuro and Ain sense a visitor approaching. A talking raccoon enters, informing them of a package left at the front door. Alarmed, Ain and Kuro warn the raccoon to stay away from it, but it explodes before they can intervene. The blast injures Kuro, and Yura expresses her concern. Ain reassures her that Kuro will recover quickly. He then orders everyone to help put out the fire, realizing that their enemies are aware of vampires' vulnerabilities. Amid the chaos, Morris, one of Ain's familiars, rushes toward the flames. Ain tries to stop him, but only manages to grab the tip of his tail. Morris sacrifices himself by diving into the fire to extinguish it, suffering severe burns in the process. The severed tail wriggles in Ain's hand, gradually regenerating into a new, smaller Morris. Ain thanks him for the sacrifice and tells the gecko to rest as long as needed. Unbeknownst to Ain, a hidden assailant lies in wait. With malicious intent, the enemy fires an ignite bullet aimed directly at him. The bullet nearly strikes him, but Kuro intervenes just in time, revealing the attacker to be a hunter. Kuro transforms into a black panther and swiftly captures the hunter. Later, the group interrogates the hunter, who expresses disbelief at the idea that Ain, being a vampire, could be one of their own. Kuro explains that there are extremist hunters who refuse to acknowledge that vampires can be allies. Ain approaches the captured hunter and asks if he is working alone. Realizing the hunter is part of a larger group, Ain urgently calls for the others to secure the back door. The hunter's plan is soon revealed. He and two accomplices, who also despise vampires, had planned to set the front of the house on fire as a diversion while they infiltrated through the back. They view raiding a vampire's home as a service to humanity, justifying their actions in an attempt to steal Ain's treasures. Meanwhile, Yura is startled by a dark shadow in the hallway. Ain explains that the shadow is another vampire who has taken on a shadow form. This vampire, named Grayton, resides near the back entrance and feeds on any food that passes through. As the two hunters navigate the hallway, they become disoriented, running in circles as the scenery constantly shifts. Exhausted and confused, they contemplate retreating, only to spot a side passage that offers a way forward. Ain explains to Yura that Grayton, the shadow vampire, is trapping the hunters in an illusion inside her stomach, slowly draining their strength. He reassures her that the hunters will be fine for the day, as they won't be completely drained immediately. Ain thanks Grayton and asks her to return his guests. Grayton then begins to swallow Ain, causing Yura to panic. Kuro reassures her, explaining that once Grayton has had her fill of Ain's unique mana, she will release him. For those who have tasted Ain's blood, all other sustenance becomes like muddy water, and they inevitably become bound to him, either as his slaves or pets. Moments later, Ain is released by Grayton. Kuro comments that his view on this matter is extreme, but Ain dismisses it, claiming that he maintains a mutually beneficial relationship with everyone involved. Yura rushes to Ain's side to check on him, and he reassures her that he's unharmed. He explains that vampires only need to lick his skin to absorb mana and don't actually need to drink his blood. He jokes that if he gave away all his blood, he wouldn't survive, cryptically reminding them that he is still flesh and blood. Later, the group confronts the leader of the hunters, who taunts Ain for his reluctance to harm humans. The hunter warns Ain that if he ever harms a human, he won't be able to live peacefully in his home. This triggers a painful memory for Yura, recalling the abuse and ostracism she and her brother faced from humans, leaving them with nowhere to go. Realizing that people never truly change, Yura accuses the hunter of being a coward and becomes enraged by his vile behavior. The hunter retaliates, sneering that monsters like them have no right to live in such luxury, further fueling Yura's anger. Sensing her rising fury, Kuro steps in to stop her. Kuro gently tells Yura that he understands her feelings but reminds her that humans have the upper hand because Ain cannot harm them. Ain steps in calmly and instructs everyone to stop. He turns to the hunters, stating that any damages inflicted on humans can be resolved amicably with money. He presents the lead hunter with a bill for the damages, leaving the man in shock. With an intimidating tone, Ain informs the hunter that the amount will be deducted from his future rewards after he reports the incident to the association. He urges the hunter to sign the compensation agreement. The hunter begins to sweat profusely, shocked by the staggering amount. Ain coldly points out that they didn't spill a drop of blood, meaning they won't be the ones settling the matter. He adds that 10 of his own people were injured, while none of the hunters were harmed. The hunter's perplexed reaction makes Ain suspect that he's new to the association and unaware of Ain's long-standing reputation. Ain explains that his business is built on trust, and over time he has established a strong reputation. In any conflict between him and the hunter, people are more likely to believe Ain's account of the incident. Enraged by this realization, the hunter sneers, calling them parasites who have outlived their time on Earth. With pure disgust, he declares that there's no meaning to their continued existence, his words freezing Yura in place. Suddenly, one of the wolves laughs and transforms back into its original vampire form, intimidating the hunter into signing the damage agreement. The other wolves begin to encircle the man, pushing him to the brink of tears in fear. Noticing Yura's shaken state, Ain gently tells her that everyone in the mansion has lost someone important to them. He adds that the meaning of life is something even humans struggle to comprehend and reassures her that she has all the time in the world to search for her own purpose and live freely. In the aftermath of the incident, Yura helps clean up the house, reflecting on her purpose and how to live her life after emerging from the woods with only her brother's memories left in her. However, Kuro tells Yura that she doesn't need to help them anymore since there are vampires who can assist with the tasks. Noticing that Yura seems a bit down, Ain invites her to join him, and they ride on another wolf together. Upon arriving at their destination, the wolf affectionately licks Ain goodbye, and the two of them walk down a dark alleyway. They are soon greeted by the gatekeeper, who warmly welcomes Ain and allows them to enter. As they walk through the company, Ain explains that this is the Records Company, a publisher that specializes in academic texts and non-fiction. He emphasizes that with books and knowledge, humans can control violence and war. They eventually enter a room overflowing with books, leaving barely any space to move. Amid the chaos is a man named Tony, who is startled awake by their arrival. His eyes quickly fixate on Yura, and he excitedly exclaims when he realizes she's a vampire. Overwhelmed with enthusiasm, he reaches out to her, but Yura instinctively uses her powers to hold him in check. Later, Tony apologizes for his overzealous reaction. Ain formally introduces Tony to Yura. Noting that Tony was once a hunter but became so fascinated with vampires that he eventually became a researcher, like everyone else in their department. Yura is taken aback, having never heard of people who actually like vampires. Ain explains that despite the intense hatred most humans have toward vampires, there are those who are deeply fascinated by them. He mentions that they are in the vampire section of the Records Company, where Tony excitedly begins showing Yura books and studies about vampires. As she observes how comfortably Tony interacts with her, Yura wonders why he isn't afraid of vampires. Tony admits that vampires are indeed frightening, but shares that his curiosity drives him to understand why the dead return to life and where the curse originated. He then asks Yura if she has ever pondered such questions during her long life. Yura pauses before admitting that it was her brother who often thought about such things, while she mostly regretted not being able to die with him. Tony remarks that she was fortunate to have lived with her brother after becoming a vampire, noting that such occurrences are rare, like the wandering Dr. Eurus. Hearing her brother's name, Yura is shocked to learn that their story is actually well known. Tony, now more thrilled than ever, realizes that Yura is Yura's older sister, a living witness to history. He excitedly tells her that the Hunter Association has some fragments of records about her and her brother. At this point, Ain admits that as soon as he heard about the vampire in the village, he suspected it might be Yura. He apologizes for the times the association failed to protect her, explaining that it was newly established at the time, and although he had heard of them earlier, he didn't get the chance to reach them. Yura then asks what the records say about her brother. Ain explains that since Yura's traveled with and protected a vampire, he was branded a heretic. Yet, at the same time, he was a talented doctor who saved many lives. Tony eagerly adds that Eurus was pivotal in the post-war philosophy regarding vampires. After the war, there were many victims of vampire attacks, leading to widespread negative sentiment and the belief that all vampires should be eradicated. The idea of learning more about vampires faded away. However, a skilled doctor like Eurus traveling with a vampire caused a stir and divided public opinion. Despite his efforts, Eurus was largely misunderstood during his lifetime. Even so, Tony expresses his deep respect for Yura's brother, causing her to weep in shock. Tony panics, but Yura tearfully explains that she believed no one remembered her brother aside from her. Ain suggests that Yura write her brother's biography, but he gently reminds her that revisiting the past and reliving memories of the deceased can be a painful experience. Despite this, Yura eagerly volunteers, showing an enthusiasm that matches Tony's. Sensing her determination, Ain acknowledges her resolve and reminds them of the first steps they need to take to move forward with the project. Meanwhile, in another room, a young girl named May is repairing a book when one of her students, Daryl, arrives early as usual. Unbeknownst to May, the young boy has always admired her, captivated by her beauty and kindness. He offers to help her with the book repair, but she gently declines, explaining that it's her responsibility. She then encourages him, acknowledging that his dream of becoming a public servant is a difficult path, but she's rooting for him. As Daryl pretends to read a book, he sneaks glances at May, who is the only daughter of the founding family of the records company. Despite having the option to live a carefree life, May chooses to serve others, even running a private school that doubles as a daycare for the company's employees to spread her love for knowledge. Daryl's heart skips a beat as he watches her, thinking she must be the very embodiment of preciousness, making his heart pound harder than usual. Daryl, though young, is mature and smarter than most adults. Coming from a well-off family, much is expected of him. Before enrolling in the prep school for government officials, he attended May's small private school, though he was initially disappointed to learn it was run by a woman. However, the moment he met May, who greeted him with a bright smile, he was struck by her beauty and immediately fell in love. May was clever, elegant, and kind. The more Daryl got to know her, the more he became infatuated. Noticing that something seems off with Daryl, May checks on him, only to find him utterly mesmerized by her. Daryl feels his heart pounding, and just as he's about to say something, Ain enters the room and greets May. May immediately stands up to greet him, and the two start catching up, much to Daryl's frustration. Seeing how casually Ain speaks with May, Daryl demands to know who he is. Amused by the boy's innocence, Ain reveals that he is the owner of the records company, which shocks Daryl, as May's father is the director. Ain clarifies that he leaves the day-to-day management to the director. Daryl looks to May for confirmation, and she nods, adding that Ain saved their workshop when it was on the verge of collapse due to debt. To further tease the boy, Ain then playfully scoots closer to May, casually mentioning that they are close enough to have spent time together many times, causing everyone to be shocked and leading to a misunderstanding. Enraged, Daryl tries to attack Ain, but before he can do any harm, Yura steps in to restrain him. Suddenly, a tick-like vampire known as a tick arachne or ticka attaches itself to Daryl, catching everyone off guard. Tony, intrigued, exclaims that this is the first time he's seen such a creature in person. According to records, the ticka latches onto a human host, using the narcotic effect of its saliva to induce a state of extreme excitement, making the host more efficient at sucking blood. The host becomes mentally unstable, and prolonged parasitism can leave them crippled. As Daryl lunges at Tony and starts biting him, Tony notes with alarm that the parasite's body is growing, a clear sign that it's taken full control of its host. Ain confirms this, explaining that the ticka manipulates its host's excitement to escape when it senses danger. Watching the boy, Ain feels a pang of sympathy. If the parasite hasn't sucked enough blood, Daryl will die and eventually become a vampire. Regrettably, Ain knows he must cut Daryl down to end his suffering. He grabs a piece of metal, transforming it into an axe, and declares that he must end the boy's torment. Horrified, Yura tries to stop him, but May intervenes, urging Yura to trust Ain. With a determined look, Ain raises his axe, seemingly poised to strike Daryl, which horrifies Yura. However, just as Ain moves, May concentrates and suddenly announces that she has caught the parasite, holding it up for everyone to see. Both Ain and Tony praise her quick thinking and precision. Ain then shows Yura that his axe is hollow, revealing that he never intended to harm the boy. Relieved, Yura realizes that Ain had planned this all along. Tony inspects the ticka, noting that centuries ago, these parasites were not uncommon, and exterminating them was extremely difficult. Many hosts died before a pesticide was developed, which drastically changed the situation, helping to nearly eliminate the parasites. Ain turns to Yura, mentioning that there are various theories about who developed the pesticide. Yura then admits that it was her brother who created it, though some unscrupulous individuals stole the formula from him. Despite this, the pesticide significantly improved the vampire ecology, and Ain agrees that it was a remarkable achievement. Ain then muses about the origin of the ticka, acknowledging that since it's a low-class vampire, it could have emerged from anywhere, making the search for its source akin to a witch hunt. However, he insists that they must prepare for the possibility that these parasites are entering a revival phase. Tony agrees and promptly leaves to discuss the matter with the medical office. Later, Yura shyly confides in May that she doesn't know the current alphabet. The letters she learned are outdated and ancient. This gap in her knowledge has caused misunderstandings, such as when she wrote a sign for the villagers, and they mistakenly thought it was a curse. Ain, noticing her discomfort, suggests that she stay at the records company to learn the new language with May's guidance. He mentions that he has another mission to attend to and will probably leave soon. Hearing this, Yura begins to panic at the thought of being left alone. Sensing her anxiety, Ain gives her a reassuring smile and tells her that she'll be fine. He emphasizes that this is a job only she can do because she alone holds her brother's memories. She is the only one who can write his biography. Realizing the truth in his words, Yura quickly regains her composure and agrees, resolving to learn the new language and complete her brother's biography. As Ain prepares for his next destination, the serpents observe the situation and remark that for someone who likes to help others, Ain seems reluctant to stay and look after the people he saved. Ain responds that sometimes all people need is a little push to stand on their own again. He adds that no matter how hard he works, there's a limit to what he can do, but he will continue to save those he can. The Hunter Association is the largest private security dispatch organization in the Empire. Founded at the end of the war, it was initially made up of mercenaries and vampire exterminators trying to make a living. However, ruffian groups began oppressing citizens, becoming the new source of strife. At one point, a sage appeared, bringing order to outlaws almost like magic. Reaching incredible heights, hunters became the heroes of the people, but the great sage's identity was never revealed. Early in the morning, Ain is greeted by the records company's employees who are delighted to see him. He thanks them for their hard work, knowing they're coming off the night shift. Throughout the building, people begin to notice his presence, immediately brightening up. The owner is as popular as ever, and everyone is there, having heard that he returned last night. As he walks through the doors, feeling honored by their support, the room suddenly slams shut, and a net falls from above. He's caught under it, and the men yell in celebration, thinking they've captured their target. Ain takes a small letter opener and cuts himself free, leaping away. Though used to it, they're still surprised to see him suddenly on the wall, complaining that using weapons is against the rules. Ain argues that he's just using a normal pen. Since they're all following the rules, he decides to humor their little game and face them head-on. They'll be playing tag, and they have to pin him down for 5 seconds before he reaches the main hall. Since injuries won't be covered by workers' compensation, he encourages everyone to be careful. As Ain plays around, leaping above them, one observer watches with great excitement, while another looks confused. The association president, Ed, asks if it's his first time seeing it. He introduces Ain, the oldest and biggest bounty in the association. The hunter can't believe his ears, realizing that everyone here is playing without any killing intent. There are more than 100 people, all with the same goal of turning him in for the reward. Ain is worth 10 million imperial gold coins, which is as much as the average country's annual budget. Seeing this ban, one of the hunters immediately gets up, eager to give it a shot. He asks if he's allowed to kill Ain, but Ed responds that the reward will be cut to 1/10 if he kills the target. Ban, having no desire to get rich, agrees, understanding the cost. Another hand is inches from grabbing Ain's foot, but the hunters trip over themselves as Ain lands on the main hall's floor, ending the game with a playful smile. The hunters get gloomy, and he tells them to clean up before leaving. Just then, a knife strikes him from behind, taking everyone by surprise.